Good afternoon. I'm Juan, and I'm a data scientist at the CFRI. I want to thank you for your time, and I'm going to do my best to ensure we all learn something new today. What is the best model for uncertainty estimation? There is no best model for every situation, but there are optimal models for each specific instance. For example, the Black-Scholes model has been the most important model in finance and trading since the 70s. But since it assumes positive prices, when the West Texas Intermediate crude oil prices went negative on April 20, 2020, the model became unusable for pricing related derivatives. No model works in every scenario. Therefore, the question is not what is the best model, but what is the best model for this specific use case? And that's why in this talk, I'll explain the main types of models available, what are their advantages and their disadvantages, and how to choose the best one for your specific use case. The talk will be structured in 6 parts. This is a lot of information, so I'm going to focus on the most important points. If you want to know more, please feel free to ask me during the Q&A section or talk to me later at the convention. Okay. What's the probability of the investment fund you put your savings into having its value over the next 6 months? Banks and trading companies have been using stochastic models to answer these kinds of questions for decades, but things are changing. To understand why, let's go back to the year 2000. That year, the M3 competition was held. Oh, thank you. That year, the M3 competition was held to discover empirically which forecasting methods were better. One of the conclusions was that simple methods do as well, or in many cases better, than sophisticated ones. Now let's fast forward to the year 2020. That year, the M5 competition was held with the same goal as the M3. And there were $100,000 in prizes, and every single one of them went to competitors that used not simple models, but machine learning models. The forecast paradigms has evolved, and businesses that do not adopt the state-of-the-art model now available may miss out on opportunities to improve their revenue. This doesn't mean older models are useless, but it does mean that just because a model was the best alternative in the past, you cannot expect it to be the best alternative today. Also, choosing between classical and modern methods is a false dilemma because ensembling different models can leverage their unique strengths to improve results. I want to mention that while it is important to inform the modeling process using business-specific knowledge, the models themselves are not very different whether we are predicting a factory's demand, a portfolio's value, or a stock's price. And new applications keep emerging in all areas. So while through this talk I'll use examples from finance, these models can be applied in any sector to help businesses control their risks. Okay. The stochastic models I'll explain assume stock price can be explained as a combination of a deterministic component and a random component. The random component in the specific stochastic models that I'll explain today will be a Brownian motion, which was discovered resisting the movements of the particles that separated from a grain of the pollen of this flower while suspended in the water. More than 100 years ago, Bachelier said about the fluctuations in the stock market. The determination of these fluctuations is subject to an infinite number of factors. It is therefore impossible to expect a mathematically exact forecast. Contradictory opinions in regard to these fluctuations are so divided that at the same time buyers believe the market is rising and sellers that it is falling. This is what we call today the efficient market hypothesis. If we knew that the stock price will go up tomorrow, we will buy today and sell tomorrow. But if we all bought the stock price today, the stock will go up today, not tomorrow. This implies that we can't predict prices with perfect accuracy. So how do we model stock prices? Anytime a stock is traded, the stock price changes. We simplify and assume one trade occurs every fixed amount of time, and it causes the price to shift up or shift down by a fixed amount. A Brownian motion is the movement the price described in this model as this time approaches zero. As this happens, the expected future price converges to a normal distribution centered at the previous price and independent of previous price movements. From this distribution, we can price financial derivatives, estimate portfolio values, compute values at risk, expected shortfalls, and many more things. Therefore, the objective of all the models we'll see today is to improve their estimate or this distribution. Thanks. Brent and WTI are the two most important oils in the oil-based financial derivatives market. The energy industry relies on these derivatives to mitigate risks, making accurate price modeling essential. Traditionally, the Black-Scholes model was used for this purpose. However, during the first COVID wave, WTI COVID prices went negative, rendering the Black-Scholes model unusable because it assumes positive prices. That's when the entire energy industry turned into the Bachelier model, which assumes prices follow a Brownian motion, but it adds a linear tendency. Here's a graph of the estimated distribution of the price of WTI a month from now using the Bachelier model. The blue line of the graph is the price of WTI over the last year. We want to estimate the price a month from now, which is marked by the green line. We use the data from the past year to estimate the tendency of the price. This estimated tendency is the orange line. This tendency gives us the mean of the estimated price in next month, marked by the red point. Because we assume prices follow a Brownian motion plus a linear tendency, the distribution in turquoise will be normal. We compute this variance from the volatility of the monthly changes of the prices, since we are estimating the price using a 1 month horizon. Once we have the distribution of the prices in the future, we can use it for many things. For example, we can use it to estimate a 90% confidence interval for the prices a month from now, and that's what the two dark blue points represent. During COVID, the energy industry used this model to estimate the risk of their trading operations and to price financial derivatives. In the case of the Bachelier model, the random component is a Brownian motion, and you can visualize the movement of the price as the sum of a deterministic tendency and a random component. This is exactly the point of uncertainty estimations, to not only have a forecast of the future, but to know how reliable that forecast is as well. This is crucial in high-stakes applications. While the Bachelier model's ability to deal with negative prices was the reason it was used for WTI prices during the COVID, it's also a weakness in many situations where negative prices don't make sense. The next model solves this. The Black-Scholes model has been the most important model in finance since it was invented in the 70s. The core of the difference between the Bachelier and the Black-Scholes model is that the Bachelier model assumes absolute changes and the Black-Scholes model assumes relative changes. The Bachelier model assumes the probability of the price going up or down by a certain value, 5 euros for example, is the same. The Black-Scholes models assume that the probability of the price multiplying or dividing itself by a certain value, 2 for example, it's the same. This has many implications. For example, the Black-Scholes models never predict negative prices because a positive price will stay positive regardless of how much you divide it. The Bachelier and the Black-Scholes model assume price movement only depend on the last price. There are situations where this doesn't make sense. For example, right after COVID, it wouldn't make sense to assume that oil prices will come back up to a value similar. For example, right after COVID, it wouldn't make sense to assume that oil prices will stay that low. It would make more sense to assume that they will come back up to a value similar to the one they have before COVID. That is still a naive assumption, but it is better than assuming that oil prices will stay that low. One way to model this is to assume there is an equilibrium value around which prices fluctuate. If the price is near these equilibrium values, it has equal chances of rising and falling. But if the price deviates significantly, it is more likely to move back towards the equilibrium price rather than keeping moving away. However, it is unrealistic to assume that the equilibrium value is always the same. The next model solves this. The Schwarzschild model is a type of mean reverting model. The Schwarzschild model is a type of mean reverting model that assumes the equilibrium price follows a geometric Brownian motion, making it dynamic rather than constant. It's used primarily to model commodities like oil, but it can be used for other purposes as long as the concept of a changing equilibrium price applies. Okay, so we want a model that is realistic and simple. Realistic to produce accurate estimates and simple to be interpretable. That's the process I have tried to highlight, the continuous search for a more realistic model, adding new features and characteristics, while at the same time trying to avoid making the model excessively complex. We want to model the dynamics that we see in reality as closely as possible, ideally with deterministic processes. But a model will never be a perfect representation of reality, because reality is infinitely complex. That's why stochastic models add random components to their deterministic parts to estimate the uncertainty associated with the use of a model that is necessarily imperfect. All models are wrong, but some are useful. The histogram in the screen shows the monthly changes in WTI prices for the last 15 years. The red line is an estimation of the distribution, and the black line is what the distribution would be if it was normal. But as you can see, it isn't. This hurts the model accuracy. There are very few instances, if any, where all the hypotheses of a model will hold perfectly. Therefore, there are two options. Option one, we use a model whose hypotheses are close enough to reality for the model to be accurate and useful. This is the methodology we have explored until now. Or option two, we use a model with the flexibility to adapt to reality under a wide variety of hypotheses. We'll explore this option with a machine learning example. The hypothesis of each model will cause them to make the same mistakes consistently. For example, if a model assumes that the expected future returns of a stock are described by a normal distribution, when they are actually described by a distribution with a higher probability of outliers, it will consistently underestimate the probability of extreme events. These consistent mistakes are called the bias of a model. They happen when a model's structure is too simple to conform to the data structure. The term bias is commonly used with this meaning in machine learning, but as we just saw, it's just as applicable to stochastic models. This is something I want to highlight in this talk. Stochastic, statistical, machine learning models, and so on are not unrelated fields. On the contrary, seeing them all as tools that can be understood from the same paradigms and using combination is extremely helpful. A model having a simple structure is not a problem if that structure is close enough to the data structure. But we don't always know the structure of the data. Also, reality is complex. Therefore, sometimes thousands, millions, or more parameters are needed to accurately reflect the data structure in order to achieve the maximum possible accuracy. We can't achieve model of those levels of complexity by iteratively adding new hypotheses as we have been doing. So let's explore a different approach. Thanks a lot. We saw a graph similar to this one that showed the distribution of the prices predicted by the Bachelier model. Now I'm going to show you how you can achieve the same thing using machine learning. I have chosen to use the NBITS model, which is a type of artificial neural network that was used by the participant in the second place of the M5 competition. While that participant ensembled it with other models, I will demonstrate it on its own for the sake of clarity. For this example, I'm going to use the stock price of the largest publicly traded company according to the Forbes Global 2000, which is Medtronic. As before, the blue line is the actual price of the stock, and this time I'm using data up to a month from this Monday when I trained the model to predict the stock price for that Monday so that we can compare the predictions with the actual price. The orange line is the base estimate of the stock price made by the model, and the red dot is the value of that best estimate a month after the data used for training the model ended. In turquoise, you can see the estimate distribution of the expected stock price around that best estimate marked by the red dot. From this distribution, we can get a lot of information. For example, the 90% confidence interval for the expected stock price delimited by the two dark blue points. To compute this distribution, we look at the errors that the model would have made if it had been used historically. I'll explain how to do this later. This is great because it means that we are not assuming that the expected stock price distribution is normal, as the Bachelier model, or low normal, as in the Black-Scholes model, or any other shape. Therefore, this method of computing the distribution will work regardless of what the true error distribution is. I'll explain now the main hypothesis of this specific version of NBITS. This model uses an artificial neural network to estimate the tendency around which future prices are expected to move. This tendency is assumed to be a polynomial of degree 3, but the key difference with the Bachelier and the Black-Scholes models is that before we were saying the past tendency, it's probably the future tendency. But what we are saying now is from the past data, we can estimate the future tendency using an artificial neural network, but this future tendency may not be the same as the past tendency. This gives this model a lot more flexibility than all of the previous models. The model that chooses the tendency polynomial coefficients adaptatively has about 80,200 parameters. Lack of explainability can be one of the difficulties of implementing machine learning models that complex on high-stakes situations. A good example, that's why explainability tools are an important area of research nowadays. A great example is NBITS. In order to increase the explainability of artificial neural networks, NBITS allows us to limit the shape of the prediction to a polynomial of a small degree. Because the polynomial of a small degree is a slowly varying function, now we can understand this as the tendency. No model is right all the time. That's why having explainability tools like this one is key to knowing when to use or not to use a specific model. In this graph, we can see exactly what is the tendency the model is assuming in this specific question. If it is coherent with our business knowledge, we can use the model. If it contradicts our business knowledge, then we need to stop and look at the situation in more detail. Because either the model or our business knowledge is wrong. Therefore, although the difficulty of explaining its outcomes used to be a limitation of machine learning models, this problem has become less and less relevant as new explainability techniques has been developed, and this trend will continue in the future. As we have seen, if the model is too simple, it will not have enough flexibility to conform to the data structure. This is called underfitting. However, if the model is too complex, it may not just conform to the structure of the information in the data, but also to the noise of the training data. This is called overfitting. The problem is that the noise is unpredictable and it will not be repeated again. Therefore, while a model that fits the noise will perform very well on the data it was trained on, it can perform very poorly on new data. Doesn't matter. That's why we want a model flexible enough to conform to the informative patterns of the data, but not so flexible that it conforms to noisy and informative patterns as well. In this particular example, you can control the level of flexibility by 1. Choosing the degree of the tendency polynomial. You can control the level of flexibility by choosing the degree of the tendency polynomial, choosing to limit the forecast to a tendency rather than adding a seasonality component, as well by modifying the size and regularization of the artificial neural network that chooses the tendency, etc. You don't have this level of adaptability with any of the stochastic models that we have seen. Also, because those stochastic models are very simple, they underfit the data in many situations, failing to capture relevant informative patterns. It can be trained on many time series at the same time. In this case, I trained the model on the stock data of the largest publicly traded companies that operate in Ireland and in all of the companies traded at Euronext Dublin. In total, I trained the model in the stock price of 45 different companies. This allowed me to train a model far more complex than I could have by training it just on the data of Medtronic without overfitting the data. This assumes that the patterns of the stock price of these companies have similarities, so the model can extrapolate from the patterns found in the data of one company to make predictions about the stock price of another company. This is something you can't do with any of the stochastic models that we have seen. Overfitting can silently destroy a model accuracy. So how do we know if a model is overfitting? By training the model on a training set and testing its performance on a separate test. A good performance in the training set may be caused by overfitting and not be replicable on new data. That's what we aim to optimize performance, not on the test set and not on the training set. However, if we train many models on the training set and we select the best one on the test set, its performance might still not be representative either. This is because the model performance varies due to test set sampling randomness, and the best model was likely performing better than it does in average. Therefore, we divide our data in 3 types of sets. Training sets, where we train the model, validation sets, which we use to choose the best model at the best model setting, and a test set, which we only use to measure the performance of the best model. That sampling randomness in the validation set limits our ability to choose the best model. One way to deal with this is using expanding window cross-validation. So the idea is, because in time series, you have time series, time from here to here. You train the model, then you validate on the next data. Now, the window in which you train the model, you increase it by 1 day, and you move the validation window 1 day, and so on and so forth. Now, if you average the performance of your model across all the validation windows, you minimize the effect of that randomness associated with the sampling of the validation set. And this way, you can get a robust estimate of your model performance. You can use this for testing as well. This also allows you to measure the empirical errors of your models on each of the validation windows. Then you can use them to estimate the distribution of the expected stock prices in the future, which is what we did with MBITs. The great thing about all of the concepts I have talked about, and many more we didn't have time to cover, is that they apply both to stochastic and machine learning models. Because of this, we can compare models of both types objectively to decide which one is preferable in each situation using these ideas: overfitting and underfitting, training validation test, expanding window cross-validation, etc. We can use these techniques and ideas to objectively compare not just the accuracy of the model's point estimates, but also the accuracy of their interval estimates, or even how accurately we can compute measures such as the value at risk, the expected shortfall, the potential future exposure, and more when we use different models to compute them. This is really important because it is impossible to know which model will perform better in each case until you actually try it, since even datasets from the same field may vary and may have very, very different data structures. Okay, I'm going to summarize the main advantage of both machine learning and stochastic models in comparison to each other, and explain some ways they can be used in combination. First, advantages of stochastic models in comparison to machine learning models. One, first of all the stochastic models we have seen were interpretable. While the prediction of machine learning models can be explained using tools like the one I showed, you can't interpret every single one of their parameters. Second, low computational cost. Because many stochastic models are so simple, they take very little time to train and predict. And third, if there is very little data or the data is very noisy, simpler models. Now, advantage of machine learning models in comparison to stochastic models. First, accuracy. This is the main advantage of machine learning models, especially when there are high amounts of data available. One of the reasons for this is that you can choose the level of flexibility of the model in a continuum to avoid overfitting and underfitting. This is great because it allows your model to detect complex patterns in the data without getting sidetracked by noise. Second, they can use information from many sources. For example, we could try to improve results of the machine learning model that I used by adding information about the volume of the stock sales or different economic indicators. This is a lot more complicated to do with the stochastic models, especially if the relationships between the different data sources are complex. Also, as we saw, you can use information from many time series, and this gives the model a lot more information to train on. Third, machine learning models have far less restrictive hypotheses than stochastic models do. For example, unlike the stochastic models we saw, which are by far the most important in finance, machine learning models don't assume future prices only depend on the last price. They don't assume future prices follow a specific distribution. They don't assume there is or there isn't a certain equilibrium value, and so on. This flexibility is great because it allows machine learning models to adapt to a much wider variety of data structures. Now, some ideas for using stochastic and machine learning models together are: first, use both separately. You would use the results of the most accurate model if their predictions are similar, but if their predictions diverge, you would stop and understand exactly what's causing this difference before making a decision. And this way, this divergence acts as a warning when predictions become less accurate, and maybe you shouldn't trust the models. Second, ensemble them using a weighted average of the predictions of different models as your final estimation. This works best when using very different models, such as stochastic and machine learning models. And third, use components of stochastic models as inputs of machine learning models. A great example would be using the equilibrium values of the prices as estimated by the Schwarzschild model as an input of a machine learning model. The most important point of this talk is to keep an open mind, especially when it comes to new models, together with good validation and testing strategies and an understanding of the limitation of each model. Without an open mind, it's impossible to find the best models available. Without good validation and testing strategies, it's impossible to distinguish great models from horrible ones. And without a deep understanding of the limitations of each model, it's impossible to know when a model can be trusted and when a model cannot be trusted. I hope this talk helps you in your path to leveraging models to control risks and take your business performance to a new level. Thank you very much for your attention.